today. So it's my pleasure now to welcome today's speaker, Dr. David Cash. He is now the regional administrator for the New England region of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Although he's been in this role for less than a year, he's been at this important work for nearly 20 years with experience in environmental policy, equity, and economic justice, including how they can and they should go hand in hand. Before he was at EPA, he was the dean of the McCormick Graduate School at UMass Boston. Before that, commissioner in the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities and the commissioner of the Massachusetts DEP. He has a PhD in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. Nearly 20 years ago, he published a paper, Knowledge Systems for Sustainable Development, a paper that we put the citation in the chat if you want to go look at it. I think it's one of the most influential papers in the field of sustainability science, which is in essence a science about improving well-being of both nature and society. It's a simple paper in some ways, and it's a deeply profound paper in others. In essence, it said, for the scientific community, it really matters that you work on issues that matter to communities. It matters that your work stands up to scientific scrutiny and is backed up by the facts, and especially it matters that you develop equitable processes in which diverse communities can deliberate and can make shared decisions even when complete agreement may not be possible. So this is a paper about how to do that important work. It had a huge impact on efforts to align research in universities with the needs of society, including right here. Fortunately, we got some early coaching from David when he came up in the fall of 2006, almost exactly 16 years ago now, to talk to us about what it was we were setting out to do, and we were setting out to create the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions. So as we roll up our sleeves to create a better future, David's ideas are more important today than ever before. Please join me in welcoming him back to the Mitchell Center.
While we're fixing this, since I see you but can't see the folks who are on the screen, I would love to just get a sense. You are, assuming you're a sample representative. Like undergrad, how many undergrads? Undergrad? Professors? Subject matter, like your major or master's or PhD, like kind of just shout out, raise your hand, shout out. Yeah.
Ecology and environmental sciences.
Ecology and environmental sciences.
And 51 on chat.
51 on chat. Awesome. Yeah.
Anthropology.
Anthropology.
Communication.
Communications. Wildlife. Wildlife.
Environmental engineering.
Environmental engineering. Economics.
Forestry.
Forestry.
Environmental studies.
Environmental studies. That's all?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, great. So I just want to note, and I imagine it would be the same if I went through all 51, that there wasn't one repeat here. And we're all trying to do the same. The thing that David talked about is improve the well-being of people and the environment. That, of course, is the mission of EPA, is to advance human health and the environment. And it takes a lot of different perspectives to do that. And you folks are the evidence of that. And the Mitchell Center fully embracing that is a fantastic example of that as well. I also want to just say hello to Darren. Really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have afterwards. You'll hear there's a lot of work that we're doing at EPA that relates to tribes and our relationship as a federal agency working with tribes as government to government. In fact, I just want to start, as I always do in these kind of talks, is to acknowledge that where we are, wherever I am in New England, and I travel all over New England, which is a wonderful benefit of this job, we're always on the ancestral lands of people who are here before colonists arrived. Here we're on the ancestral lands of the Penobscot, but wherever I am in New England, it's in a different culture's land. And it's really important in my mind to acknowledge that and to note that in the past, present, and future, those people stewarded the land and water. And I like to think that the work that we're doing at EPA is attempting to do that same kind of thing, to steward our lands and waters in effective ways. So it's great to be here again after so many years, to be back at the Mitchell Center. I think it's as David was reminding me, it's a little more built up. This was a garage, you were saying, with tractors and all that, which I'm sure I got excited about then, because my first career was actually as a shepherd and lumberjack out in Oregon. So, I mean, that career didn't last that long; it was about a year. But I have a place in my heart for the agricultural industry, and it's great to be here with this I named for such an amazing person, who, of course, he's known for his work on the international stage and addressing issues in Ireland. But he, as I learned as I was looking into more of his past, he kind of ferried through the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, which were pivotal. And you can imagine there was a time a Republican president, divided Congress. It was pretty remarkable that he was able to do that. It's had long-reaching impacts, those amendments, things that we're still working under. So it's that much more of a pleasure to be here. So I started as a regional administrator, and just for a really quick organizational note, EPA is a national federal agency with more than half of its staff in Washington, D.C., and then the country is divided into 10 different regions. And we're region number 1. That's only because they're from right to left, I guess. And it's all New England. So, and the 10 federal tribes that are in New England. And it's an incredibly exciting time to be in federal government, unprecedented. I mean, I've been working in this space in government for 20 years, but before that, for 30 plus years in the space of environment, energy, climate change, environmental justice. And there's never been a time of abundance in this kind of way. I mean, there are 2 signature acts that we're working under, I'll tell you more about. The bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed last November, and the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed just recently. Between the 2 of them, EPA is the steward of about $100 billion. That's with a B. That's going to go to states and tribes and communities and the private sector to get to the greenhouse gas neutral place that we need to be, that will grow the clean energy economy, that will provide green jobs, and it will do it all in a way where we center justice. And I'll talk a little bit more about Justice 40. That's the commitment by the president that these kind of funds are going to go so that the benefits adhere to communities, disadvantaged communities, 40% of those benefits adhere to those communities. And that's huge. That means that as we think about how we invest in these amenities that protect human health and the environment, we're thinking about the communities that have been the most underserved and the most overburdened right now. So we're incredibly excited about that. And I thought it would be helpful for me to kind of chart out my priorities, my 4 priorities that I have, and that are totally consistent with the Biden-Harris administration and with Administrator Michael Regan. It's one of the reasons I was drawn to work here at EPA. Environmental justice is 1, climate change is a second, and of course those are intertwined in pretty fundamental ways. Spending infrastructure dollars in ways that help communities and advance equity in those communities. We should not be living in a country in which people turn on their tap and they worry about the water they're giving their kid. We should not be in a country where kids stand on a street corner and when the school bus comes by, the parent worries about what their kids are breathing in. We should be in a country in which this explosive growth in green energy jobs are shared equitably by communities who have not been served by technology growth, economic growth in the past. And then the last piece is on communications. And this isn't something that's sort of like put in our strategic plan or whatever, but as I came in here, one of the things, and I think David mentioned this intersection of environmental protection and economic development and equity is something that I don't think the environmental community, whether you're in government, in a non-governmental organization, or you're in academia, talks enough about. And there's the myth that protecting the environment hurts the economy, and I think that's not. It couldn't be farther from the truth. We'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, so let me jump into some of those 4 priorities. So on my first day of work, I was in Washington. I was there for a retreat for all of the regional administrators, and Administrator Regan spoke and introduced himself. We got to meet him, etc. And then he ran off to New York City, and he ran off to be on Trevor Noah show, which was pretty remarkable. And sadness that he's leaving. What he's going to be doing, that is Trevor Noah, not Administrator Reagan. He's staying. But he said that night when asked about his priorities, he said, everything I do at EPA is through the lens of environmental justice, contracting, procurement, air quality, water quality, land management. Starts with, are we protecting the least among us? Those who have light political representation and those who have not been at the table for decades. That was just incredible to hear from my boss. How awesome is that, this moment? And it's also incredible that it was on the Trevor Noah show. And it was a time where I have daughters in their 20s, both in the environment field. And man, my respect in their eyes went up, I don't know how many notches, because my boss was on the Trevor Noah show. That was just awesome. So there's this a keen awareness at EPA that overburdened and vulnerable communities have borne pollution and the cumulative impacts of pollution from many different sources, whether it's air or water or soil, for far too long. And in fact, we could say that EPA and its permitting in the past has been responsible for that, as many government agencies have. And it's no surprise that industrial facilities, ranging from fuel storage facilities, power plants, manufacturing, etc., heavy truck traffic by warehouses, those don't usually operate in wealthy neighborhoods, right? Those end up in neighborhoods that are low-income communities of color. And the data is irrefutable, right? We know, for example, that Black children in the United States face asthma rates twice as high as white children, that 1 in 4 Black and Hispanic Americans live within 3 miles of a Superfund site, that of the 2,600 fossil fuel fired plants, that's 73% of the whole fleet, they're in communities of color, low-income communities. So it's just, and I could go on and on. We could take water, we could take soil, we could take traffic, we could whatever dimension you want. We would see similar results. And those results those impacts are cumulative in ways that we don't understand, right? So we have communities who aren't just facing air pollution, but are facing water pollution, are facing increased traffic, but also have things not related to the environment, low unemployment, lower quality education, all of those kinds of things. And of course, EPA is created sort of in these silos. We have a Clean Air Act, a Clean Water Act. We don't have a cumulative impact act. And so we're trying to figure out moving forward how we can use the authority that we have, stay totally within the legal boundaries of what we can do to address some of these kinds of cumulative impacts and some of these kinds of concerns. And of course, as I mentioned, there's actions that we can take with the discretion that we already have, and Justice 40 is one of them. Figuring out how that $100 billion and some of the dollars that would come every year anyway to EPA and communities could go to those underserved communities, 40% underserved communities, to tribal communities, in a way that can address long-standing issues of impact and disinvestment. So that's just a huge effort that we're undergoing, and we're still in the midst of figuring out the right way to do that. How do we define what disadvantaged is? How do we understand what cumulative impacts are? And that's something that we're working on again in a way that puts our region somewhat ahead of the line with other regions. But we're doing a major cumulative impact study in Chelsea. A water permit came up that would deal with the stormwater runoff from fossil fuel tanks that are in Chelsea. If you've ever been in Boston or any major harbor that has those huge oil tanks, well, they have a lot of exposed land, and that means water runs off. That could be carrying all kinds of stuff in it. And so these permits are designed to help those private entities meet their responsibility in terms of polluting the water. But an environmental justice group in Chelsea was like, but wait a minute, we have these other impacts. We're right in a transportation corridor. We have a fossil fuel plant nearby. Logan Airport flies, the planes fly right above us. This permit can't just be about water. And so what we're doing is stepping back. We've released the permit. We haven't done the science to back, making it more focusing on cumulative, but we've also created in the permit the first time nationwide where the cumulative impacts have to be studied. We can open up the permit in the future if we think it's necessary to add some of these other issues. So we're really, really excited about that. The second angle on environmental justice is our staff, which is remarkable. I have been blown away by the EPA staff. They are just brilliant, dedicated, creative, innovative, fun to be with. It's just every picnic I've gone to, we play cornhole, and I've been beaten a couple of times. It's been a little tough on me, but there's like this camaraderie within EPA that's pretty phenomenal. But we don't represent in our diversity, the diversity of the communities that we represent, that we serve. And that's especially true in leadership roles. And so we're working really hard figuring out how to improve recruitment, retention. How does the HR system, which in federal government is complicated and burdensome, how do we create that system so that we can attract folks? And as is true in every organization, almost every organization I go to, the university systems in New England are the same, generally the same. There are a couple of sites where the diversity represents the communities they're in. And in fact, the school that I came from, most recently, UMass Boston, is one of those. I don't know the data, but I imagine University of Maine is similar to the UConns and the UMass Amherst campus and University of New Hampshire, where there's a struggle to attract and retain high quality students that represent the diversity of the communities that we're in. And that's probably true with the faculty as well. I could be wrong on that, but my guess is it's pretty rare. And in fact, UMass Boston completely failed at having faculty that represented the students that we serve. And I imagine it's the same here. So it's something that I'm totally committed in figuring out how to solve, and I entreat you all, particularly as the leaders here, to figure out how to do that here in the university system. Okay, well, that's environmental justice. Let me talk a little bit about the infrastructure law. So, this was passed in November, and just a huge amount of funding coming to EPA for this for infrastructure. And I'm just going to tell a little story about what this looks like on the ground. So last week, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. That's not essentially totally an infrastructure bill, but it is. It sets the standards for water quality, but it also provides funding through a program called the State Revolving Fund, which federal dollars comes to states. States use those for municipalities to build wastewater treatment plants and drinking water systems and all that kind of stuff. So we hosted this event at Boston Harbor. You may recall, or you probably don't, unless you're old enough, sitting in the back, and old enough that Boston Harbor was known as the most polluted body of water in the country. This was 50 years ago. Clean Water Act passed in 1972. EPA in the state of Massachusetts was sued in 1983. EPA quickly flipped and became one of the plaintiffs. So all of us ganged up on the state of Massachusetts. And through that advocacy, several lawsuits, and a very forward-looking judge, we started looking up harbor. And this event we had was in East Boston, which 30 years ago, the site we were standing on was an industrial wasteland. Now it was a beautiful park, 2 blocks from 2 elementary schools. 80 school kids come over. They're doing a special section on sustainability and climate and environment, and they're totally excited. And our assistant administrator, Radhika Fox, was there. Ayanna Presley was there. Ed Markey was there. I mean, it was just a phenomenal event. Michelle Wu, Mayor Boston, was there, and the kids were fantastic. We went in a boat to tour Boston Harbor, which is just remarkable to do that nowadays. It's clean, and it's so clean. As one of my EPA staff there was one of the standards in the Clean Water Act is that it's swimmable, and so as the regional administrator, I had to show that it was swimmable when we're in the middle of Boston Harbor, and so jumped off into Boston Harbor. It was awesome. It was totally great. Water was delightful, and it just was indication of how things have changed when there's good government and there's financial support to clean up messes that have happened in the past. And that's exactly what's happening now with our infrastructure bill, where we are going to states and cities and towns and saying we've got funding now for those projects we haven't been able to do, and we're particularly targeting those communities that have suffered from the burden of water pollution and air pollution in the past. One of my first days back in the region after that retreat was in Saco, and I was joined by the administrator. He flew up, and Congresswoman Pingree was there, and we were announcing lots of funding coming to Maine from the bill. So we're very, very excited about it. In fact, just this year, about $40 million was coming through the SRF program to Maine, just an incredible amount of funds. Now, some of that will be used to replace lead pipes, which are primarily in older urban parts of the region. Tackling emerging contaminants like PFAS, you've probably heard a lot about PFAS, to build drinking water and wastewater systems, and to make them resilient to climate change. That was really interesting in Saco because that's right on the water. We know that all the models show that's going to be flooded out during regular high tides, not just at storm events. So really excited, leaning in to leveraging these funds to have the impacts, like I had said before, where family can take a bath and take a shower, turn on a tap, and not worry for their kids, because that's what this is about. So again, huge amount of work that we're doing here. Related part of the infrastructure bill was also about brownfields, which again, Maine is superb at brownfields. Or think of these old mills that are here in Maine, or old manufacturing facilities, which are not as horrendous as a Superfund site. They're pretty bad, can't be used in the state that they're in. And so the federal government comes in through this, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, $240 million was made available nationwide. And New England got 50 million, so a quarter. Now it's partly because we have older industrial stock here, but it's partly because partnerships that we've developed over the years between EPA, states, municipalities have allowed municipalities to put forward fantastic applications. And Maine itself is getting about 20 million of that. So again, more than, like I say, more than your fair share. It's your fair share. But Maine has done a really great job of converting these horrible risks to communities, to assets to communities. One of the biggest challenges with brownfields is how do you avoid gentrification, right? Because they're often in underserved or burdened communities, and they're taking a dilapidated, awful, risky site and turning it into an amenity with stores and residential, condos and light manufacturing. How do we make sure that that doesn't end up in destroying the community that it's in, that the community can benefit from that? And there are a couple of different municipal-based, state-based policies that can avoid that, whether it's percentage of affordable housing or requirements for jobs that are there go to the community. But that's one of the central challenges, especially that we have so much funding coming into these places. So I'm looking forward to working with Maine and the municipalities here and figuring out how to get that right.
that aspect of equity. Okay, we're now transition to climate change. Biggest challenge of our time, biggest opportunity of our time. And the Inflation Reduction Act is just remarkable. It's the time finally where President Biden has been able to finally move the United States very aggressively in addressing climate change in a way that it never has. And the investments that will happen that will drive offshore wind, which I'll talk some more about, solar, batteries, electric vehicles, heat pumps in your homes, all of those kinds of things are going to be game changing in a huge way. So we're really excited about that. We're collaborating with the Department of Energy, with Department of Interior on siting offshore wind, et cetera. But there also is fundamental parts of the Inflation Reduction Act that focus on environmental justice. So $60 billion, for example, will go toward environmental justice across the government, not just at EPA, and through EPA as we direct our dollars to environmental and climate justice grants throughout our region. It'll, for the first time, really hold polluters accountable, a variety of different settings, and it will provide the right kind of tax incentives to advance the development, innovation, and deployment of things like offshore wind and electric vehicles. And we're just really, really excited about that. One intersecting piece of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the climate parts of the Inflation Reduction Act is the dollars that are going to convert old diesel buses to electric school buses. We were nationwide, we were kind of given a target, all of the regions, to reach out to municipalities and look to get the applications for about $500 million that could go toward exchanging diesel buses for electric vehicle buses and the infrastructure that we would need. In this region, we got 8 times the demand that we satisfied. And on the one hand, that's frustrating. We're going to have some school districts who are not happy this year, but it's a 5-year program. $5 billion, 5 years. And again, we go to what does this mean in a person's life? It will mean that, and I don't know how many of you took the school bus to school, but I remember standing at my school bus, the bus would come by and it was stinky, and there was something like that was a little kind of fragrant about that smell, but also like disgusting, and you get headaches in the school bus itself. That's going to be something of the past, where your kid can ride in a school bus, sit and stand on the corner waiting for the school bus and not have to worry about diesel emissions. So we're really excited about that. And on a very, very high level, one of the things that I think about, how many of you have heard of the hockey stick graph? Okay, so there's a professor, climate scientist at Penn State, Michael Mann, and many others, who coined this term. The graphs have been there for a while, which basically shows greenhouse gas emissions over time, greenhouse gas emissions, and they quickly go up in the last 100 years, 50 or 100 years. And that would be true for some other climate change impacts. Sea level has been pretty steady, and it's going to go up. Sea level's going to rise, right? Heat island effects, pretty steady, almost any measure of the things that we're concerned about have this kind of hockey stick. And that's pretty fearful, right? You don't want to be on that end of a hockey stick. I think one way to kind of think about it is hockey sticks versus hockey sticks, because if you look at things like onshore wind deployment in the United States, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, flat, last 10 years, going up. Solar, flat, boom, going up. Electric vehicles, flat, now, especially this year, boom, going up. And if you kind of flip the hockey stick and look at it in reverse, and you say, well, what about costs? Same kind of thing. Both onshore and offshore wind. Really high, boom, dropping precipitously. Solar PV, really high, boom, dropping precipitously. Batteries, boom. EVs, boom, costs coming down. We're seeing a blip in EVs right now because of this weird supply chain issue, et cetera, and also the weird thing of used EV prices going up. But that should all settle down once kind of the economy settles in and supply chain issues are dealt with, et cetera. But this is the time This is the time where we're at this inflection point where costs are dropping, deployment is taking off, and now we have this bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. The President and Congress have basically said, we've got to make this change. We've got to protect the environment. We've got to grow clean energy jobs. We've got to protect these communities who have been overburdened. So it's an incredibly exciting time to be working in this field when so much is happening. And I know Maine has played, again, an outsized share, particularly when it comes to offshore wind. So kind of a little, I'm kind of geek on the offshore wind side. I've been studying it quite a bit. And the way many, certainly the first projects go is they essentially put the big monopole into the ground below the water, right? It's pretty stable there, but it also has big impacts there. So they're developing all kinds of offshore wind floating turbines. And one of the key centers is at University of Maine. They have a test site off the coast. If you want to look at what a floating wind turbine looks like in a hurricane, they have a great video where it survived. It did fine, wasn't damaged. And there are big advantages to that, including some of the impacts that you have on fish, fisheries, whales, and things like that you have more from a monopile than floating. Plus, when you get off the coast of California, Washington, Oregon, it doesn't have nice, shallow continental shelf like we have here in the Northeast. And so we've got to figure out how we can do floating. So that's just one of the ways. I know Maine has been doing a lot of things, but that's one within the system that's been really exciting. And offshore wind itself just seems like there could be a multiplicity of benefits that come from advancing offshore wind. Not only will we get the greenhouse gas benefits of shifting to a renewable source, taking offline fossil fuel sources, but again, particularly in the Northeast, where we have port after port after port that has fallen on hard times, and many of those ports, really diverse communities, low-income communities, immigrant communities, we have a huge opportunity as we expand the manufacturing in these ports to serve the offshore wind industry, where all the servicing and maintenance of these facilities is going to be important to grow jobs in those communities in a way that just hasn't happened when we've had other big economic booms. If you think about pharmaceutical boom, the biotech boom, the IT boom, even when they came into communities, like I'm thinking of Kendall Square Kendall Square in Cambridge, pretty urban environment, totally transformed by the biopharma and pharmaceutical industry, and has completely gentrified the area, not giving jobs for the people who live there. In fact, they've been kind of forced out. We have an opportunity here with offshore wind to be the opposite, to have workforce development plans in place. Already, many of the states are requiring union jobs and diversity in hiring in their power purchase agreements, where the state requires a state utility to purchase from offshore wind. So there are various levers that we have that we can be in a very different place in offshore wind as we look down the line decades into the future. So let me just pivot then to communications, which what I've been doing for the last 25 minutes, which is figuring out how to communicate things in a way that people can grasp and understand. And this stuff is complicated. There are a lot of notes here that various of my staff wrote down here that I have not said because it just that's kind of dense wonkery that I don't want to get into now because it would require having people. It's so important, and again, that's what I love about this work is that we get to do events like Jump in Boston Harbor, but I get to also sit with brilliant people who are describing complicated permitting in a way that is just beautifully and elegantly mapping on how you use the law to help people's lives. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that. I spend a lot of time on the road. I do a lot of interviews. I didn't handle the Boston Harbor dive as well as I could have. I should have had more social media and some influencer help me, and could have been really great. Trying to figure that out, but that's all part of it. I spent on Earth Day. I was at see your hat at the Red Sox game. I didn't get to throw out the first pitch. That's going to happen next year, but I did get to play ball, which was pretty exciting, and but also then talk to the management about how maybe we can have a relationship with the Red Sox where maybe we get 30 seconds at every X Games on the big screen, where we can have some kind of public service announcement about the environment, educate about the growth, the hockey stick graphs in a positive way, or what the Clean Water Act has done. We have like a 30-second spot in the Clean Water Act and how it's totally transformed Boston Harbor. And by the way, one of the theme songs they play every single game and the Red Sox game is "Love That Dirty Water" by the Dropkick Murphys. By the way, I invited to come to our event, but they didn't show up. I mean, they chose not to show up. But they wanted to show up in the trip. But that was part of what I'm thinking. If I could get them there, we're going to get a whole different segment of the people thinking about the Clean Water Act, et cetera. So that's how I'm thinking about communication. And a fundamental part of that communication is that environmental protection and economic development, especially equitable economic development, go hand in hand. You go down to Boston Harbor now, there's so many different ways that you can enjoy Boston Harbor, whether it's from museums that are on the shore in boats or out to the Boston Harbor Islands, or like these kids do. There's a sailing place right next to that park that I mentioned, and these kids are taking classes. It's all part of this kind of funded system where the kids go down, they learn how to sail, they enjoy the harbor in a way that their parents never could have enjoyed, right? And that's just huge. That's just huge. So I'm trying to get out to tell that story, to communicate with communities at lots of different levels. Part of the reason I'm here today is for this talk, but also tomorrow I head up to Bar Harbor, where we're having the Region 1 Tribal Leaders Environmental Summit. We do that every year, and to communicate in multiple directions to the people that we serve, so we can understand better what the tribe's needs are, how we can better serve them. They can understand what our capacities are, how we can assist, how we can't assist. That kind of communication is critically important. In fact, my first into Maine a couple of times since I've been on, and my first big trip was up to visit Maine, and I visited all 5 of the tribes here. Again, as a way to connect, understand what the needs are, and how we can best be of service. So let me close with the latter part of the title of your talk, which is huge challenges, which there certainly are, but the endless opportunities. We're at this moment, and whether you think of that hockey stick as costs or deployment or attention, right? There's more and more attention to climate change. It goes on and on. But every time there's a Fiona or an Ian, people are concerned. Every time there's a greater understanding of the impacts that underserved communities have, there's more support for us to address that in a meaningful kind of way. And I think the decisions that we as EPA can make, Department of Energy, and state governments and municipal governments, are at this cusp of addressing these issues in a way that fundamentally improve people's lives, whether they're breathing cleaner air, whether the fear of sea level rise declines, whether they know they can get a job now and or in the future, whether they know they can take a bus and not worry about the exhaust, or that their own car will have no exhaust. Those are all the kinds of things that I think are critically important as we grab the opportunities that we have now, seize incredible ways that we can both protect the environment and protect the economy, advance the economy, do it in a way that brings justice. So why don't I stop there, and happy to take questions. Thanks.
Can we all give another hand for this just wonderful, informative, instructive talk? We thank you very much. David started out noting that you wrote one of the most important papers on issues that matter in terms of good science, good practice, and that people have learned so much from your writing, and they're now very much learning from your work as an administrator. It was interesting, we got to hear that your first career was as a lumberer and a shepherd. Can you tell us a little bit about how that influenced what you're doing now? And you could say no, it didn't. But...
That's a great question.
So when I was in college, I was actually a biology major, but I studied neuroscience because there wasn't an environmental studies major possibility back then. And I had spent a summer working as a Student Conservation Association volunteer in Zion National Park studying peregrine falcons because I was wondering whether I wanted to do field biology. It was spectacular. The desert Southwest is a really important part of my life, but I realized there's no way I want to be a field biologist. For me, it just didn't suit. And I decided I wanted to be a science teacher. But I wasn't ready to go back to graduate school. And so I took a year off and hitchhiked around the West. I'm from the East. I was born in New York, went to college on the East Coast. And so a friend of mine and I hitchhiked around the West Coast and we found jobs at places. And this was like pre-internet days. So it was actually like licking a stamp and putting out a letter and saying, oh, I hear I could work at your farm. And we stopped at this ranch in Eastern Oregon. That was just paradise. I mean, it was like on the foothills of the Wallowa Mountains. There was 240 acres. We spent 3 weeks there harvesting beets, and it was just amazing. And when I left, I said, if you ever have an opening, I'd be delighted to come back to be the ranch hand, because they always hired one ranch hand. And a year and a half later, as I was about to start a teaching program at Yale, I got the call that said, our ranch hand left, would you like to come? And as Mark Twain said, never let your schooling get in the way of your education. I turned down Yale and decided to go out to work on this ranch. And so I worked with there were two former teachers owned it. One of them was a biology teacher, and he was just salt of the earth, just thought about sustainability and the intersection of all different parts of ecology and economy and society in ways that I had never really experienced. And so I became that much more interested in environmental protection. And then I did actually go on, I got a teaching degree at Lewis and Clark out in Portland in science education. I taught science education for 4 years, always focusing on society, science, society, and values and environmental policy. And by the end of that 4 years, I was like, I want to go into policy, and looked around for a program that I could kind of spread my wings in that kind of way. So it was really instrumental. That 1 year on the ranch was kind of really instrumental. He also had half of those acreage was in woodlands, and I think he was the first woodland farmer in Oregon that became certified by one of the important sustainable wood farming organizations. So it was pretty amazing.
Very interesting, very interesting. One of the themes that you brought to us in your talk was how important communication is. And of course, the first thing that goes through, everybody's head is how do we do it? And one of the listeners on this session picked up on your talk about the hockey stick graph, the famous figure showing abrupt temperature rises and their implications, and just really encouraged everybody. They included a reference for us to look at. Thoughts on communication? One of the things that has been important to the Mitchell Center is we've had some amazing communication scholars that have been involved. So do you have thoughts about what should be done or what might be important?
I'm a little nervous because there's like a faculty member here who's, I think, great. There's like a quiz I'm taking now. So
No.
I'm sure you could answer this better than I could. Actually, I'd love to hear what you have to say after so you can evaluate what I say. I don't know. I think it's always been important, I think, to communicate these complicated things in a way that touches people's lives, about things that they care about. So we were very, you mentioned quickly that I was in state government, and I was at the ground floor when Governor Deval Patrick came in, and one of his 3 priorities was clean energy and climate. And I was one of the kind of holdovers from the Romney administration, and there were several of us advising him on kind of how to frame this. And it was always about economic issues, because we figured 20+% of people care about environment. They may make decisions based on the environment, but the vast majority are like worried about their bills, worried about how much the gas tank, all that kind of thing. And so we always framed it in addition to the importance of protecting the world from climate change. And I saw one of the questions on addressing biodiversity loss. I didn't mention that here. That's clearly part of one of the things that we're interested in. But always bring it back to where we thought people really cared, and that was on their electric bills, or that they see their neighbor putting solar on their roof and they like go over. There was some really funny ads where the environment was not mentioned, and they had two people across the fence from each other, and one has a solar, one doesn't, and it's like, what is that? What's that all about? And the guy like goes through the list of how much money he's saving, and his bills are zero, and and it's like, that's what people care about. And, or one of the things that people care about. So I think it's really important, which is why kind of understanding where communities are at, and they're all going to be different, is really important. It's really important to understand. And then you can figure out how to communicate in a way that, that touches them. And what I think is great about the opportunities to address climate change is that you can come at so many different angles. Jobs is a great angle. Costs is a great angle. Energy independence, great angle. Environmental protection, great angle. Local air pollution, climate pollution, good for water too. I mean, all of these. And the benefits, there are multiple benefits, and figuring out how to communicate those benefits in a way that captures people's minds, which is why I keep thinking of like the Boston Harbor dive. I didn't grab that opportunity enough because not enough people saw the tweet of it, but it's, what is that saying? That's saying government can clean up this harbor in a way that you can have fun in it, That's pretty awesome. So trying to figure out ways to do that.
Very interesting. I mean, that example.
How'd I do?
Oh, you were great. You were
No,
great.
I wasn't asking you. I was asking the communications professor.
Sorry about that.
Starting a community is a great idea. I would add just one thing that has been going through my mind is this phrase of those who have not been at the table.
Mhm.
So I would think another communication practice would be, how do you change the dynamics of gathering information? So you're not, it's not the physical space of sitting at the table. How do you gather that information from other people, and wondering, are there different strategies you're using?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and a huge challenge for a large bureaucracy like EPA that historically has been like, we do big regulations, et cetera. Now, there are parts of what EPA does that do connect to communities, and they're really sophisticated people at EPA that understand how to have a community meeting in such a way that gets the right kind of input, but it's something that we really need to work on now in a major way. Yeah.
People had trouble hearing that question. Could you repeat the question?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Right. So Karen's point was, how do you, tell me if I get this right, how do you elicit feedback, input, communication in a way that those who historically have not been at the table are really at the table, not just, in a show kind of way? And did I more or less get that right?
Yeah, and are there other forums that we can use?
And are there
to
other
elicit that
forums?
feedback that fits better?
Yeah.
Not whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I just love this question because in our ride up here, Sanjay and I were talking a lot about this. And when we're back in the office, we talk with folks about like our community groups, community meetings, the right way to do it. And then if we do that, we really have to make sure that we have translation services, that we maybe have childcare services, that maybe we pay people for their time, right? If you think about like, professional conferences where people are paid by their work to go, or you may even pay the speaker to go, they get a stipend or something like that. We have to be thinking along those lines when we're bringing the expertise that's in a community to the table, right? And because they are experts. So I don't have any answers, but man, those are real important challenges that we're trying to figure out.
Another question about.
Hold on a second. Sanjay, anything else to add on that one? Because I know you've been thinking about that a ton. Okay, great. Sorry, go ahead, Linda.
Another question about communication. Your examples were so great about children and how to involve children, whether it's swimming in the Boston Harbor or other things, but getting children to the events because they're important. And you talked about school buses as as an important experience children have, both with pollution and with the opportunities for those school buses to change. As you think about communication, do things like getting people involved in writing children's books that are about the school buses and also about these great policy changes that you're doing, is that something could happen?
I'm thinking about that now. I hadn't thought about that, although I definitely, there's a whole environmental education wing within EPA at headquarters and in all the regions that I know work on how do you create the right kind of, whether they're books or other kinds of exciting materials, and more obviously online materials for this. I can't say it's something that's a huge amount of resources go to at EPA. But yeah, that is an important group of people to get to.
A last question, and then I'm sure there's some in the room, but I'm picking up on some of the things, on the chat. Suppose people wanted to follow you around for a day, to see what you do, to understand what you do. And if they're students, maybe thinking they want to become you someday, what would they see?
Ooh, what would they see? I thought you were going to ask, how do they do that? And then I'm like thinking of, oh my gosh, I have to talk to the ethics officer. So they would see, first of all, they would see somebody having so much fun. Partly because my job is so filled with different things every day and challenging things and interesting things. And, like I mentioned, within a week, I'll do an event where, handing out big checks to municipal officials for brownfields, and then hop over to another town where we have a roundtable on PFAS, as I mentioned that quickly before. And then I'll have a meeting. Fortunately, even when I'm traveling, I could do meetings because everything can be done remotely, which is great. As I mentioned, I'll have a meeting with like a group of the permit writers and the lawyers and the enforcement people from all different divisions, which is another great thing about how EPA operates. It brings in all the different silos. It cuts across silos in a pretty impressive way. And then, they'll be proposing options, oh, we could do the permit this way. Oh, this one doesn't really hit on EJ enough. This one hits on this other thing too much. Let's figure out how we can solve it, and becomes this really, I find, incredibly powerful kind of concrete way that I and my colleagues show our public service, and that's really meaningful to me. So they would see that. They would see me answering 100+ emails on all various types. They would see me doing the variety of things that a manager can and should do, whether it's HR related or otherwise. They would see me figuring out ways to be wind in the sails of my staff, whether it's like, while I was just waiting here, every week headquarters sends around like kudos or highlights of staff in every region. They're all nominated from everybody. Every time that comes from the region, from the headquarters, and there's a Region 1 staff member there, I resend it back out to all the staff saying, great job, that you did this. Here's why it's great. We really appreciate your work. And, so I try, they'd see me doing that. They'd see me then take the tea home, and I'd be working on the tea. I'd get home, I'd catch up on a whole bunch of other, it's incredibly exciting. And then there'd be brainstorm sessions exactly on, Karen, on your question. Oof, we've got billions of dollars that are going to EJ communities. How do we spend that in a way that they need, what they want? And that means you have to be there and figure it out and understand how to set up these structures. So it would be pretty exciting,
Wow.
Hey, Linda. Yeah, so I'm going to let you combine a few things that you've talked about.
Okay.
You've got a big audience in the room and virtually of students. Some of them might be trying to figure out whether to become shepherds or lumberjacks or something else. That's an interesting challenge. You've been at a university, you went through this yourself, and you're also trying to grow your workforce of leaders. What advice would you have for them?
Well, being a shepherd and a lumberjack is an awesome career. There's times I think I should have stayed there. But if any of you kind of have there's so many ways to contribute. That's what's awesome. If, some of you end up in a lab with petri dishes for the next 40 years, solving some kind of problem, that's awesome. And if some of you work in the private sector where you're doing forestry for private, that's awesome. And if you want to go into government, I think they're just huge opportunities. I mean, it's a place where you are given this kind of sacred duty to work for the people, paid by the people, and to solve problems on their behalf. And, I will say I have never been more kind of satisfied in my work than when I'm working for government, and that I'm a part of government. And there are so many different ways to do that. It's like, you could be like an accounting major and work for EPA, right? And you would do the same accounting you would do for any other large organization. You could be in HR and work for EPA. You can be in facilities management and work for EPA. And you could be an environmental engineer and work for EPA, and an air quality specialist and work for EPA, and an anthropologist and work for EPA. It's going to be anthropologists that help us solve that problem, the communications problems, right? So all of those are kind of avenues where you could use your expertise, your skills, your background to advance a really important mission, and obviously a mission that I think that those of you who raised your hand have an interest in. That's why you're this kind of major, because something about the environment entices you, excites you, engages you, interests you, et cetera. You feel some kind of calling. And plus, EPA is a great place to work. I mean, it's just, like I was mentioning, the camaraderie is incredible. The ability to move laterally and up, up in seniority is amazing. And the teamwork feeling is just, incredible. And all of this has to be solved by teamwork. You can't solve any of these problems I've mentioned with like one person who has great ideas. It's not possible. I see a question up here.
Hi, thank you so much for that advice. I'm curious, I have a more specific question.
Sure.
I'm curious, we've heard a lot about air and water. I'm kind of a soil person. I'm curious if you can speak to any of the IRA's specific, if there's any specific soil.
Sure.
Agriculture.
Yeah, so they're in IRA, the IRA. Oh, sorry. The question was, you talked a lot about air and water, but what about soils? And is there stuff in the various climate sections of the IRA that are about agriculture and soil? And I'll answer that, and then I'll add to it because there's more to it too. So one piece is, and I am not expert this at all, and I haven't studied those sections, but yes, there is significant funding going to agriculture for agriculture to be more sustainable, for methods to be used to capture carbon in soils better, all of those kinds of things. And I will bet there are people in this room who know all about that better than I do, because I'm not an ag person. And the other angle on soils is the kind of health of soils as part of ecosystems and part of public health. So in the bipartisan infrastructure law, well, the brownfields money I mentioned goes toward soil remediation, and the Superfund money, which I didn't talk it. So this is the sites, and Maine has a couple of these sites where they're the worst, the most toxic. The kind of remediation of those sites is critically important so that they can be reused. Probably not reused into agricultural fields, but reused in ways that protects the environment that they're in, protects the ecology that they're in, and sometimes that has a human dimension, sometimes it doesn't. We just got a briefing in the car on the way up here of 3 mines in Vermont that are Superfund sites. And the before and after pictures of one of the three mines has been addressed. Just remarkable, you know, like a stream that's bright orange from the acidic, toxic, and lead and iron laced stuff that's going down the river, and whatever years later, 15 years later, a kind of like clear stream, same site. And of course, all the soil impacts of that kind of stuff. So, and it was not in a populated area. So this was like purely, how do we, you know, remediate this ecological disaster? So those would be the two big areas that I would think of.
So unfortunately, we're at time, but you can definitely come up for a minute afterwards. Let's all thank David and Sanjay for this.
Thank you. Thank you, David.